pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Peggy Holman. When I attended my very first DONA International Board of Directors meeting in September of 2014, it became very quickly apparent to me that I was joining DONA leadership at a time of monumental change. And I think that we can all recognize that, at least intellectually, we can recognize that change is inevitable. Having said that, it is often very difficult. So when I was on my way home from that first Board of Directors meeting, I was on the airplane, I thought, I've really got to seek out some resources so that I can figure out how to navigate this process that I have never done before, that I've never experienced, because I was certainly very committed to the work that I knew I needed to contribute to on the board. And that was when I found the work of Peggy Holman. Now I'm going to read her bio to you, and then I'm going to come back and make the connection and why I felt like she was the perfect speaker for us for the conference at this time in DONA's history and the environment and landscape that we work in. Peggy is an author and consultant. She helps cultivate a field of practice that engages the diverse people of a system, like a corporation or a nonprofit organization or a community of doulas, to create their future. She is a leader in deploying collaborative processes that involve hundreds of people in these organizations or communities to achieve breakthroughs together. She has taught a course on system change for American University Master of Science in Organizational Development program. Her book, The Change Handbook, is considered the definitive resource for leaders and consultants who work to increase resilience, agility, collaboration in their organizations and communities. Her book, Engaging Emergence, Turning Upheaval into Opportunity, won the 2011 Nautilus Gold Book Award for the Conscious Business and Leadership. In it, she provides stories, principles, practices for inviting people to come together to compassionately disrupt the status quo and to move toward possibility. Now, I'd like to read to you just a really short paragraph from that book, Engaging Emergence, the one that, when I read it, kind of jumped off the page and anchored itself in my body and helped me to know that this was going to be the resource that I needed. It showed me how relevant this process of engaging emergence is, for doulas especially, whether it's within our professional organization, whether it's back home in our local communities, or perhaps just within your particular professional practice and where you might be. Step up. Take responsibility for what you love as an act of service. This practice is a game-changing skill of engaging. It liberates our heart, mind, and spirit. It calls us to put our unique gifts to use for ourselves, for others, and for the systems that matter to us. The more this practice becomes our operating norm, the more innovation, joy, solidarity, generosity, and other qualities of well-being appear. And the capacities for listening and connecting through this practice appear. It's my joy and honor to introduce you to the local Bellevue resident. How great was that? Peggy Holman.
Thank you. So it's great to be with you, and welcome to my hometown. I don't often get to do this here. How many of you had a chance to see some of the Seattle area since you got here? Oh, good. A number of hands. Has anybody discovered the Bellevue Arts and Crafts Fair that's going on? Excellent. So the word is out. I highly recommend. It's walking distance from here. Check it out. Even if you don't buy anything, it's just fun to look. It's great stuff. So I was looking through the program for the conference and realized that what I'm talking to you about is really kind of different from the other subjects that you typically cover. And so I thought I'd start with just a little informal survey here about its relevance. So I'd like to get a show of hands. How many of you feel like you're experiencing disruption in your life or work at the moment? Well, that's a fair number of folks. So for those of you who are raising your hands, here's my follow-up question. How many of you are finding joy or meaning or inspiration in that disruption? Oh, good. A number of you. That's also wonderful to hear. And I hope if you didn't raise your hand that by the time I'm done here, that you may consider putting your hand up. And by the way, if you didn't raise your hand at all, I had the great joy of spending time with my nephew and his wife and their newborn about 3 weeks ago. And it is very clear to me that the work you do is with all kinds of people who are in the midst of massive disruption in their lives. So I want to start here by talking a little bit about the nature of change. And I'll do this by talking about a pattern that I've observed in the work I've done with organizations and communities through the years, as well as the study of the science of complexity and what that is teaching us about change. And I want to start by offering up one clear idea, which is the notion that all change begins with disruption. And if you stop and think about it, it makes a good deal of sense, because if there's no disruption, there's no need for change, right? We can just kind of hang out with the way things are and everything's comfortable. And so one of the things that means is that the relationship that we have with disruption has a great deal to do with how we experience it. And so one of the things I personally find very helpful if I'm going into unknown territory is the more context I have, the more equipped I feel to deal with it. And so I want to start by describing a pattern that you can pretty reliably depend on if you start looking for it. And it begins with the notion of a coherent system, a stable state. And what I mean by that is you know how things work. You know how you get clients, you know who you work with, you know the routine of how things are going to happen, right? People know their roles, and it's all pretty comfortable. Even the things that irritate you about it have been irritating you for a while, and you know them, so they're familiar. So this is the territory of habit, status quo, which can actually be enormously helpful to us in getting things done, because we don't have to think about the routines when we know how they work. And what a disruption does is it interrupts that, sometimes in very small ways, sometimes in very large ways. I was talking to book publishers a few years back, and I asked if somebody could give me an example of a disruption in their world. And one of them, without hesitation, instantly said, the assumption that people read books. Well, that's kind of fundamental if you're a book publisher. And so it's very understandable that our first response to disruption is very often to be fearful or angry or try to ignore it or put it away in some place you don't have to think about it. And in practice, disruption really opens the doorway for something new to emerge. And one of the things that I find is that if you can bring a perspective of compassion, compassion if you are the source of disruption. I think about the idea of being a compassionate disruptor. And I can imagine as you work with clients, that's a skill that can be very useful to you. And also when you're on the receiving end of disruption, that if you can be compassionate with yourself and with others, it can make a huge difference in your stepping into it. Because this is the territory of really letting go, of stepping into not knowing, which can both be intimidating and tremendously exciting and inspiring if you bring curiosity to it. So a question that I often ask when faced with disruption is, how do we approach it creatively? How do we engage with it creatively? I'm thinking about my nephew and his wife and their newborn, and watching them figuring out rhythms of eating and sleeping, things that we kind of take for granted, that all of a sudden are completely up in the air for them. And my niece has this app on her phone that lets her track how long a feeding lasts and what the timing is between feedings, and she's looking for patterns, trying to find some new stability in her life. And so, eventually, you start to find the things that differentiate, the things that make a difference in this new unknown world. And I watched her say, oh yeah, the baby is eating every 2.5 hours. I can depend on that. And of course, as soon as that comes up, it's all up in the air again. But eventually, it may take a few years. I'll bet a rhythm of eating and sleeping will return to something that now involves all three of them. So there's a new coherence that arises, ideally with a little bit of wisdom with it, in which there is something of a stable state, but it's not the way it used to be. It will have elements of the past that still have relevance, and aspects from the future, perhaps involving technology or new relationships that weren't possible before. So this pattern of disruption, differentiation, and coherence begins to show up if you look for it in the systems that you work with. And I often find talking about an idea is nowhere near as meaningful as actually interacting with it. And so I'm going to invite you to join me in experiencing a bit of a compassionate disruption and maybe some messiness in this middle ground of differentiation where you don't know what works necessarily, but you try stuff and see what does, and see if we can discover a little bit of coherence. So the way we're going to do this is I have a question for you that's looking for question. So you've been here for about 1.5 days. You have another day. Before you leave here, what's a question that you hope to explore before you leave the conference? And it may be something that you came in with, that you knew very consciously, this is something that I want to talk about while I'm here. Or maybe it's something that you didn't think about consciously, but it pops into your head as I'm talking. So we're not going to take a whole lot of time. But my invitation to you is not quite yet. Not quite yet. Virginia has a microphone because we are going to be hearing some things in the room. But we're going to start with you having a chance to stand up and walk around and talk to each other. And so here's the invitation. Take your question and talk to at least 3 people. Ideally, some of them people you don't know. Share your question with them and listen to their question. And then thank them and move on, find somebody else and do the same. And we're not going to take very long, just 2 or 3 minutes to do this. So, got the idea? It's after lunch. It's a good time to stand up, walk around, share your questions, and I'll get your attention in 2 or 3 minutes. I get your attention? If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap once. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap twice. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap 3 times. Thank you very much. So stay standing where you are for those of you who are standing up. So just a quick survey for a moment. How many of you got clearer about your own question by sharing it with others? Yeah, some of you. Okay. How many heard a question that you hadn't thought of that you found kind of interesting in talking to others? Well, all right, a few of you. How many of you found other people who are asking similar questions to yours? More hands on that one. All right. So we're going to keep going in this mode for just 2 or 3 more minutes. And here's your task this time. And this one really will require you to stand up and do some walking around. Find some folks who are exploring questions similar to your own. You're looking for your kindred spirits, right? Okay, let me get your attention again. One more time. I'll keep talking until you can hear me. Thank you. So I noticed most of you seem to have landed in a group somewhere. So one last task. In the group that you're in, talk about what drew you together. What's that attractor? And it may be you can frame it as a question. Maybe it's one of the questions that one of you brought to the group, or maybe it's some kind of new question that emerges as you compare notes about what brought you together. Maybe it's just a phrase. So whatever it is, again, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we've got a couple of mic runners in the room. We're going to hear from some of you about what it is that drew you here. Okay? So you're doing one of the mics?
No, Kindle took it away from me, but somebody has it. Are you ready for them?
When I go quiet again. No, there were 2 mics. We're going to want them both.
Yeah, we have 2.
Okay.
The 2 people that have the hand mic, get ready, and okay, she's going to let you know when she's ready for you. Okay, she's right over there. Where is Kendall? Get your attention. I'm down on the floor. I'm always far more comfortable in the room than on a stage. So, great. Thank you. Isn't it nice that we have these signals that everybody knows? Tell us things. That's part of that stable state, right? Status quo. Okay, we've got 2 people with mics. So 1 on each end of the room. So let's see a hand if you've got a question of what brought you here, or something that describes what attracted the group of people that came together. So let's hear what's in the room. There's a hand over here.
Hi, I'm Joyce. I represent these lovely ladies right now. All of us sort of came together with questions of what's next. in that it looks different for each one of us. Sort of what's next for me personally, what's next for me as a business, what's next for my community of doulas, what's next for DONA. So that's kind of what brought us all together.
Great. Thank you. So what's next? Who else has something to share? Raise your hand, and over here. Kendall. By the way, you may want to stand up and say your name.
Oh.
You didn't hear that there, but.
Okay. I'm Kendall, and representing many people at this table. What does a mentor-mentee relationship look like?
Ooh. Well, that sounds like it had some resonance. We do that together. Ooh. Good sound. Great. Mentor-mentees. What else? Over here.
Oh, behind you. So I'm Morgan. One of the big questions that's been coming up for me that I've kind of been holding back on is how do we better support women of color? And how do we make a space for women of color to be with us in this room?
Thank you. Another question with resonance. What else? Got one over here.
My question is I'm Rachel. My question is how do I do this work sustainably? And
Say that again.
How do I do this work sustainably? And that's an emotional and a mental sustainability as well as a financial.
Great. Sustainability, inclusion, diversity and inclusion, possibility, mentor, mentee. Great questions. Who else has something that their group drew their group together? Over here.
Hi, I'm Heidi, and this is loud. Wow. And my teeny group was talking about being in a stage where we're reinventing our careers.
There's a small topic. Yeah, you're quite right.
Our teeny group had the same discussion.
At the same, oh, so you've got more kindred spirits over here. All right, very significant topic. Let's take one or two more.
I didn't find a group for my question, but I'm throwing it out here, and I would find me on Facebook. I'm on the big group. But I'm Elise, and I'm interested in finding more about including my daughters as they grow. My 7-year-old begs me to go with me every time I go to a birth. Mommy, can I help the mommy have their baby? And I'm just like, when you get bigger. Thank you.
Who wants to join her on that question, exploring that question? Have some kindreds out there for her? Oh, somebody must be interested in that.
Well, there's some mother and daughter doula teams.
Mother and daughter doula teams. Cool. Okay. How about one more?
I have a question, and I've asked Penny this question. I found one other person, but I'm looking for any other input. As a doula, an experienced doula in childbirth educator who is about to become a grandmother for the very first time. For the first time. So I'm curious about if there are any experienced doulas here who were with their daughters or daughters-in-law, you know, so, good. Find me, please tell me. Because I haven't yet had the conversation. I need to have the conversation with my daughter-in-law to figure out, does she want me there? Does she know what I can do? Does she want me there? So, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sounds like you found each other. All right, we'll take one more. Oh,
all you grandmothers and grandmother-in-laws, I have a YouTube channel, and on that I have an interview with a person who's about to become a grandmother, and I'm giving her the tips that I learned being a grandmother at the births of my 8 grandchildren. So you might want to, those of you in that spot, there might be some good advice on there for you.
thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to shift to a slightly different question, and then I'll be saying a few more words to you. And here's my question: what was your experience just now as you wandered around with your question, not quite knowing who you were going to find, and finding folks? And here we are starting to get a very rich conversation going. So reflect on the experience. We've got one over here.
Hello, my name is Kira. I'm a doula here in Seattle. And my experience with talking about this was being forced to articulate that kind of general how I feel about my question, which was kind of how do I better immerse myself and get connected in my doula community, being a new doula. I got reflected that question back to me from the people that I was talking with who are on the other side. How do we engage new doulas was her question. And so I was able to kind of answer my own question by saying, well, maybe this and maybe this. And as I started to do that, became more confident in articulating, identifying, and helping myself.
Great. Excellent. Clearer, more confident, more articulate. That sounds kind of good.
I wasn't sure if you were asking about reflecting on the experience of hearing people share around the room, or either way, but
the whole of
in
it.
hearing people share even questions that weren't my own, I thought it was really cool to feel a connection. Like my heart went out to these people that even though I wasn't one of their kindred spirits asking the same question, I felt connection as people are vulnerable and saying, I don't know about this thing. I guess maybe that was me feeling like, oh, I get how you are wondering about this.
So how many of you felt more of a sense of connection in the room as you started sharing questions? Yeah. That's very common. Yeah. Good stuff, right? Yeah. How about one more observation, reflection? Anybody have something they want to share? Right. Oh, right here.
I think maybe similar to, I'm sorry, I forgot your name already, but what you said is it felt a little lonely at first, because I thought, oh my gosh, nobody's going to have the question. I actually didn't have a question, and so I thought, oh, everybody else is going to have a question. And then I found my little tribe here, and it felt so good.
Not nice. You discover you're not alone. Also, very, very common when we actually start sharing what matters to us. So I want to build on the observations that you're making. So when faced with this pattern of disruption and wanting to step in to find the differences that make a difference and find new coherence and do it with compassion and curiosity and creativity and wisdom, how do you do that? So I want to offer up a strategy to think about how you create that growing sense of connection that you're talking about when you're dealing with the disorientation of not quite knowing what's next. So when you're feeling like that, what do you do? One of the great places to start is create a container. And I have a colleague who was telling me that I was telling her that I was going to be talking to a group of doulas, and she said, that's the work we do with organizations and communities. We are doulas for them. And I thought that was really, really insightful, because much of our work is creating a safe space. And I should say a safe enough space. So it's not so contained that you can hide from the change. Ignore it, because if you do that, it just tends to get louder. And more destructive. So creating a sufficient amount of psychological space that people are willing to share themselves authentically. That's what I mean. And in some ways, it's a womb-like space, but again, not so safe. Maybe it's the womb towards the end where it starts telling the baby, your time is done, it's time to move out. So how do you see? He agrees. So how do you do that? How do you create that kind of a container? So I find 3 elements go into it. The first is to ask great questions. And I call them generative questions because they're questions that give us spark a sense of possibility. They're questions that interrupt habit. They interrupt the status quo, but they do it in an inspiring and aspirational kind of way. You know, a generic form of the question is, given what's going on, what's possible now? I heard that. As a matter of fact, as we listened to some of the questions in this room, they all sounded very generative, very juicy. There's another, in talking with Kendall and in understanding a bit about your world, one of the things that she talked about as a challenge is the desire to make doulas accessible no matter what your level of income, that people have access to doulas. And at the same token, the desire that that you have a right to earn a decent living doing this work, and that there's often a tension between those things. And some of the very best generative questions are ones that hold that kind of creative tension. So, you know, how do we be accessible to all who want a doula and ensure that we make a great living doing that? It's an interesting, juicy question to explore. So 2 other qualities of great questions. One, they act as attractors to others who care. And we saw a little bit of into that room. They start to connect us when you ask an intriguing, provocative question that draws people in. And then another characteristic is it's a question you don't know the answer to. And implicit in a question like that is a spirit of invitation, because if you don't know the answer and you put the question out there, it's an invitation for others to join you in finding an answer together. Which brings me to another aspect of creating a great container, which is to invite the diversity of people who care. Now, very often, part of that diversity are the very people that you think are the source of the disruption. So it isn't necessarily always comfortable to put that invitation out there. But here's a way of thinking about it. They wouldn't be disruptive if they didn't also care. And so this is about recognizing a part of the system that perhaps you haven't thought of as being part of us and inviting it in so that there's a place for that difference in perspective. And part of what makes that so important is if the only people you ever talk to are the people that are like you, well, chances are you're going to get the same old solutions even if you're asking a great question. By bringing a different mix of people together to explore something that you're all attracted to, the opportunity for achieving breakthroughs, for finding new solutions to questions that you care about goes way up. I have a colleague who works a lot in the political arena, bringing people from across the political spectrum together. I mean, they bring not just Democrats and Republicans, but anarchists and libertarians and Green Party people, you name it. They're in the room. And they always start their gatherings by inviting people to share stories with each other about what it meant to them to be an American when they were 8 years old. And the stories that come out move people beyond seeing each other as just their positions around things. They get to know who each other are as human beings. And those stories of when you're 8 years old, they shape who we are, how we experience the world. And so suddenly people who have maybe been, great political foes suddenly discover they all care about the future of their families, the well-being of their children. And in rediscovering that place of connection, they're far more willing to use their differences in creative ways where they become a source of ideas. And in the process of doing that, to make that most possible, I'll add one other element to great containers, which is a spirit of welcome. There's a gathering that I've been part of for many years, and the hosting of it moves from group to group. And this one particular time, the hosts welcomed us at the door, greeted us by name, and gave us a hug on our way into the room. And it was so striking to me, the quality of conversations that we had at that particular session were deeper and richer and more connecting than any we'd ever been before. Something so subtle as saying hi and welcome and a hug changed the quality of how we interacted with each other. It was amazing. I have another friend who does work with families in immigrant communities, and they bring parents together from the neighborhood, but many different cultures, and they always put tablecloths down from the different countries that people are from. And it says such a strong signal to people who may be nervous about showing up at these meetings, because it says, I belong here. There's a place for me at this table. It's very powerful in setting up a greater willingness for people to bring their authentic voice. One other thing, what happens when the disruption shows up in the room? You know, when somebody who has a violently different opinion lets it be known and there's nothing compassionate about the way they do it. And frankly, most of us haven't been trained. We haven't learned the skills of how to bring difference present in compassionate ways. It's a great thing to start developing, I find, in myself, and it's something I encourage you to think about. But when that kind of disruption shows up, the best thing I know to bring to it is the quality of listening, of being present to hearing a voice that's different and sees the world differently. So and when I first started doing this kind of dialogic work about 20 years ago, I discovered that when I wanted to say, I disagree with you, that was the perfect time to shut up and instead just ask the question, which is, that's an interesting perspective. Tell me more about that. Help me understand more about how you see the world. And through the process of doing that, and then really shut up and listen. The one caveat on that, if you listen and then use what the person tells you to go after them, don't expect them to do it again. I learned that one the hard way, actually. But instead, if I can reflect back what I heard, and that person truly, deeply feels heard, there's a possibility that they'll then turn around and ask, so how do you see this? And all of a sudden, that kind of connection starts growing between us. One of my favorite, most powerful examples of that kind of thing is something called the Public Conversation Project that happened in Boston. Is anyone familiar with it by any chance? No. Okay, this got started quite a number of years back when there were acts of violence happening at abortion clinics. And some people who do the kind of work that I do in bringing people with different perspectives together said, we've got to do something about this. And they reached out to pro-choice and pro-life leaders in their city and said, would you be willing to talk to each other? And it took a lot of work to actually get them in the room, and they finally agreed to do it under the condition that they did it in secret. No press would know about it, because they were all fearful if their constituency knew they were talking to those other people, that they'd be ostracized. Well, they didn't meet just once. They met weekly for months and months. And when they finally went public, like 9 months later, they did it because they had grown to know and respect each other as human beings and knew that they all wanted the best for their families. They didn't change each other's points of view about pro-life and pro-choice, but what they did do was, in discovering their shared humanity, they found some things that they could do together. So, for example, they agreed to dial back the rhetoric so that they were not contributing to the violence at clinics. And they also all realized that they had a common commitment in ending unwanted pregnancies, and that was an area where they could work together, and they did. So that's the kind of thing that happens in this kind of container. So asking generative questions, inviting the diversity of people who care, creating a welcoming environment. And into this area of differentiation, what do? Well, you invite the opportunities for individual expression and connection. You had just a little experience of that here. And what I can tell you is there are an endless number of ways of do this. I've got a good friend who says that if you want to create change, throw a better party. Right? A lot of this is about getting an interesting group of people together around a question that matters and getting out of the way, letting the conversation take place. Potlucks are a great way to go. There's also about 50 years now of experimentation with the kinds of conversational practices that I work with in organizations and communities, and you had a little taste of it. A lot of them are based on this idea of creating the opportunity for small groups of people to talk to each other. And in the process, we discover that the conversations that we're having in the small have relevance to the large. And that among us, we create a system of conversations that we may not care about directly, but are glad that other people are pursuing. And because together we form a whole system. And there's a turning point that we tend to experience in these conversations where we begin to discover that what's most deeply personal and what's good for me as an individual, we discover those places where it's also good for the system. And at that point, something shifted in how we see ourselves. There's a different level and quality of connection. And by reflecting together, we begin to discover those places that create a new coherence. And it tends to be a more complex, different mix of people. And yet we discover once again the underlying assumptions that glue us together in a way that support us. To me, I had another example I was going to share, but I can't think of it. So what I'm going to do instead, we've got about 10 minutes. So what I'd like to do is go back to you and at your tables. And yeah, the tables are pretty big, so if you want, split it in half and stick to groups of 3 or 4. And do some reflection on what you heard here in these ideas of dealing with disruption and finding a new coherence that are meaningful to you. I have a slide for that. So what did you hear that struck you? And what does it mean for your own practice? How might it apply to your own work? And we'll take about 5 minutes of conversations at your table, or 2 conversations at your table, and then we'll do a little more passing the mic so that we end not on my words, but on yours. Okay? So about 5 minutes. I have to tell you, sometimes when raising hands, my favorite is when somebody puts their hands up and they keep talking to the person next to them. Right? But you guys are great. So if I can ask our mic runners again, if you've got a reflection you want to share, there's somebody over there.
Hi, I'm Heather. It really hit me, especially when you were giving the example about the pro-life and pro-choice people meeting together, how much more difficult the work is when it's online. When you can't see someone's face and connect to their humanity, and when you can't create a container because people can respond anytime, any day, in any manner, and so it's hard to create some of the things that you have showed us it leads to success in dealing with disruption.
I do have colleagues who are experimenting with online ways of doing this. So there is a thread of this work is how do we do this across the world? Yeah. What else? Oh, actually, another fun thing about that. My tech friends, I was talking to somebody and they were asking him, you know, you've got all this great technology, so why do you have to get together face to face, right? And his response was really brief. He said, higher bandwidth.
We were talking about how to do changes, like how can we help to do changes in our hospitals. And I was just telling my story of how I was the first childbirth educator in my state, still am the only one acting one right now that is teaching, and doula. And so I started 8 years ago, and what happened was, I don't know if you guys know, but at least in my state, we're like 50 years behind in birth. I'm in Mexico, in the state of Sonora, and we still have moms don't deliver in a, how do you call it, the birth room, or, so we have the labor room, and then the pushing room, and then we take them to recuperation room, and then finally you get to go to another room where the family can visit you or whatever. So that, for example, that's one of the changes we did. Finally, last Thursday, we had the grand inauguration of the new LPD, that's what you call it, LDR rooms, yes. So finally we have them. Who made the change? I didn't do the change. What I did is I told the moms, I keep showing them videos of what should be going on. And they're like, oh, so we don't have to be changing rooms? No, everything can be in the same room. First of all, this is your baby. They shouldn't take it away, because what we do is, as baby is born, the pediatrician takes the baby away and take it to the nurse room, so mom won't meet her baby till like 2 or 4 hours after, if she had a C-section, for example. It'd be 4 to 5 hours after. So what we would do is take pictures in the nursery so the mom can see her baby. So we're like, how do we change that? So this, having just one room for them to labor and have the birth, made a huge change, because now they can keep their baby.
Thank you. And something I heard you saying in that story was you didn't do the change, but you equipped the moms to carry the message. There's, yep. It's amazingly powerful to be able to plant seeds in others. There was something when Kendall read that paragraph out of my book, she actually hit on what is at the heart of this work for me, which is the idea of take responsibility for what you love. And it's funny, when I say that to business leaders, they hear that as, oh my God, it's going to be chaos because everybody's going to go off doing their own thing. And in point of fact, when people are invited to really tend to what they care most deeply about, we all draw from the same human stream. And so it actually ends up being what they pursue is an act of service on behalf of us all. So.
Reminds me of is one of those clicky-clack things or other sort of physics dynamic things where they move the balls and there's a very random pattern of chaos, but if you give it enough time, it finds, and I don't know the word, but it finds the pattern is established, or a rhythm.
Yep.
You know, from the chaos.
Yep.
That's exactly what this reminds me of.
It is exactly what this is. It's what it looks like in human systems. It's the patterns of change as we bounce off of each other, give each other feedback. And frankly, it's not always pretty. It's definitely not always comfortable. Things die in human systems and change. Systems die, the way things worked. And so it's very understandable that people mourn a way of life that isn't there anymore. And that others are excited because, particularly those who have been marginalized, are suddenly finding a doorway in, a place where they are of the system rather than being kept out and apart. And we redefine who we are together in a new way that embraces some of what came before that is worth conserving, and some that hasn't been possible until now. And so what's new is different and yet has elements of the past in it. All right, let's see. We have time. One more. Oh, all right, two more, and then we'll call it quits.
One of the things that we mentioned was when the baby becomes the disruptor, when there's an unwanted pregnancy or an unexpected pregnancy, and seeing how they come to terms and prepare for that individually and as a couple.
Powerful stuff. And I hope this pattern actually provides some insight in working with them. Yeah. Okay, last one.
Yeah, one thing I was realizing and thinking about this, often when you're in a state of disruption or disequilibrium, sometimes you personally feel that as a sign of weakness. And but actually, you know, when you open it up to other people, that's what most helps you get through it and move forward and change. But I think often people, especially like new parents or new moms, when you're in this total state of disruption, you want to kind of power through it on your own and work your way through it so that you can do it. But that's almost when you most need to open up to other people. So I think
it's a great insight. I have a colleague, one of the processes I work with is something called open space technology. And in it, people are invited to self-organize around the topics that matter most to them. And in the process of doing that, I just lost my point. You were saying, say. Yep. Thank you. Yep. And we tend to close down, right? Try and go smaller and control what we can control. And when exactly the opposite is what's most useful, that's the time to invite people to step in. And it is a place of huge vulnerability. Again, the insight for that, I have a colleague who's doing work bringing together 25 Israelis and 25 Palestinians. They met in Rome, and what they discovered in talking to each other was that place of opening to each other actually created an opportunity for a quality of conversation that none of them had ever had before. And it was by doing something very counterintuitive. So we'll end on that note. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. Great fun. Thank you.